Thank you for those songs, brother. And to say it's very good to be here. And we have the Zimmerman family here with us this morning, Dean Zimmerman, to speak to us about open hands. And this is something that I've run into a number of times in Mexico for sure. But there's everywhere I hear about them and the mission that they are doing, it's good reports, and I've had interest to hear more about it. And even last summer at convention, I picked up a pamphlet, and I don't know if they have cameras there and saw me do that or what, but soon after that, Dean contacted me and said, "Can I come and share about open hands?" So I'm very, very interested to hear more about it, what they're doing, and how it is a ministry, or they use it to reach people for the Lord. So take your time and close as you see fit. I'm sure Adriel might have a song or something afterwards, however you want to. But the Lord bless you as you come.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Dean Zimmerman, and you can hear I have a little bit of a cold, so hopefully my voice holds up well for us this morning. But so grateful for the opportunity to be with you here. Wonderful congregation, very welcoming, so thank you for that. I'm here with my wife Kendra and our two youngest children. Dash is 10, Layla is 12. We have two children also back in Lancaster County, where we call home, in the small town of Lidditz, a little historic town. We live right in town there. Moved in there about 3 years ago. Been enjoying that. But we have two older daughters that aren't on the trip with us. They go to Schaeferstown Mennonite High School there, and they both had jobs. They were working at a little Brazilian cafe shop there in town on Saturday, so they weren't able to be with us. One of the special things that we got to do on this trip is, wow, I kind of lost track of time, but maybe 3-4 years ago, we helped settle a family from Afghanistan. They were part of that crisis that was happening. He was part of their doing something, working with the U.S. military. His life was in danger, and so within a day's notice, they had to leave the country. So they brought their family to the States. They were living in a Army barracks. Minnesota, maybe somewhere. I can't quite say that now. But anyway, our family had the opportunity to help them get settled into Lancaster County. We found a place for them to stay. We helped them get up to date on their medical records, and we got a job for them. So we got a lot of close contact with their family. But a few years ago, they moved to Richmond, Virginia. She has a sister that lives in that area. And so when I was talking to John about coming here, I was looking on the map, and I was like, well, our route is going to take us right through Richmond. They're just a couple minutes off of 295 there. And so yesterday we got to spend some time with their family. They have 5 children. The ages of their children are close to the same as ours, and so we always have enjoyed spending time with them. So I got to connect with them again. So that was great, for an opportunity for us to do that together and to be here as a family then. So what I am here to talk about is the work of Open Hands. I have been involved with Open Hands for just a little over a year, so I'm going to give some opportunity for questions, and hopefully I can answer them. I've been learning a lot about the organization, but it had started as a part-time position, and as of July I started working full-time with the ministry, which has been really good. Now, so I'm talking about poverty. That's what the vision of Open Hands is, to help people in poverty. And as I think about that, we had, as a family, we had the experience of living in northwestern Pennsylvania with Reach Out Ministries for a while. We were serving there as house parents. So there were 7 volunteer teachers that lived with us there. And that's a town that grew up rapidly with the boom of the oil industry, and then with some restrictions that happened, like it kind of collapsed. And so you have this town that was very successful back in the day. In fact, one of the wealthiest per capita in the area, and now is kind of a bit of a ghost town. There's these mansions that are dilapidated, and a lot of people on welfare. And so we would get people that would contact us all the time. We lived at the parsonage of the church, and so they would call and say, I'm hungry, I need some food. Is there anything that you can do to help? And so I was expecting this. I knew this is part of what I'm going to experience. And so I was trying to develop, how am I supposed to respond to that? Because as Christian people, we see it throughout Scripture that God cares for the poor people. In fact, when you're reading through Scripture, you've read it multiple times, but it comes to new life. There's a verse in Galatians chapter 2, verse 10. Paul is talking to, he's writing about how the apostles accepted him and how his ministry was to go to the Gentiles, and they were going to keep ministering to the Jews, and they sent Paul and Barnabas out. Does anyone know what they told them to do as they sent them out? I would be really impressed if someone actually has the answer to this, because it says, Galatians 2, verse 10, in the King James Version, it says, let me start at verse 9. In fact, James, Peter, and John, who were known as pillars of the church, recognized the gift God had given me. They accepted Barnabas and me as their fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they unto the circumcision. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I had also been forward to do. So, as they're being sent out, they're saying, remember the poor people. And that's kind of the heartbeat, I think, of me and for, I'm sure, you as well. We want to care for people. We want to see that people are succeeding. We want to see that people are thriving. And so what do you do when someone calls you and says, I need food? So I kind of adapted the model that I'm going to, we're not a food-serving ministry, but I can give you a bag of groceries. I can go meet you at your house, and then we'll make an assessment from there of what is needed. There's tons of resources in the community. There's no reason that anyone is hungry in the city of Bradford there. And so it took a while. So I got this phone call from a lady, and so I went to meet her, gave her some groceries, and I told her, what the expectation is. I can't do this regularly. We don't have funding for this, but I'll help you today, and I'll help you get set up on a budget. I know some resources. We'll get you in contact with the right people. There's no reason for you not to have any food. And the next week, I would get a phone call from a different person with a different address, and I'd go there, and it's the same person there again. And so they figured out some creative ways to get some more food. And oftentimes, it wasn't that they were without food. It was just that they didn't. It was easier to ask someone to bring something than it was to make their own food. And so I say that as part of the problem that we face. On this picture, this is, I think, what the problem for us is there's a person in need, as you can see on this picture, and he's reaching for something. And how are you going to direct what he is reaching for? Now, the easiest thing for me to do, in the case that I'm talking about there in our story in Bradford, is show up with a loaf of bread. That's the easiest way to meet their need. And when we do that, they say, well, thank you so much. We have been praying that someone would bring us something. We've been praying that our school tuition bill gets paid. You have answered that prayer. But what is the next part of the solution? They begin praying for the next time the school tuition bill is due. And I understand the concepts. We walk by faith. God gives us what we need. We ask and we receive. And so there's this balance that we feel. And yet, at the same time, what this person really needs is not so much the loaf of bread. Yes, he needs that too. But the key that will release him from the bondage that he is in is what he really needs to set him free. And I think that us here in the United States as believers probably hold access to both of those. We have the resources, the education, what is necessary for a lot of people to be set free from the poverty, from the bondage that they're in. But we're also in a very affluent communities as well, and so we have the access to the bread as well. So what do we choose to give them? And that's the tension that I want to acknowledge here as we begin. One of the key verses is in 2 Corinthians 17, verse 18, and all things are of God, who hath reconciled us to be himself by Jesus Christ, and hath given us the ministry of reconciliation. It goes on to talk about we are then to be ambassadors. We who have received the new life of Christ, living and dwelling within us, now have the key can I say, to take this gospel of reconciliation to other people so that they can also experience what we have received. And that's really where we begin when we begin to talk about poverty, is the need of reconciliation. It's easy to be like that prisoner. Like sometimes, like I can be in that same camp, like instant gratification. This is my need. This is what I want right now. But to get somebody to shift, to get me to shift to like what is best a year from now for me, what is best 2 years from now for me, isn't maybe something that's going to be very appealing in the moment. Actually, as we were talking to our Afghani friends, that's one of the things that they discovered in the welfare system. Like his wife was getting a job too, and they soon discovered how much she can earn, and that's going to restrict what they get on their SNAP benefits or some other government benefits. And so he said it's better that she stays at home and she takes care of her children, and that's an important role for her as the mother for their young children. But it's that mentality that they have discovered what they can gain by the level of income that they're on now. And so if she gets a job, it's actually going to be worse for them right now. But what does that lead to 3 years from now? That's the kind of thinking ahead that we're trying to promote here with Open Hands. And so that thinking is very relevant for even here in the United States. We work mostly in other countries. We have some programs that we work with here in the States too. I'll talk more about that later. Our mission is to develop community, reducing poverty through Christ-centered savings groups and training programs. The name came from Deuteronomy, so the story that goes along with this is, sorry, I'm having a hard time getting the clicker to connect, but there we go. When Open Hands was introduced in Kenya, there was this, so the idea of this American organization that's coming to a place like Kenya called Open Hands, they're going to be giving something, right? So that's the expectation. People come saying like, well, this American organization coming with the name of Open Hands, they're going to give us something. And so they came just because we'll see what we can get out of this. And as I talked about what Open Hands does, one of the men that was there said like, so how'd you get your name? Because like what you're talking about, you're saying you're not actually going to give us anything. Where does the name Open Hands comes from? It comes from Deuteronomy 15:11. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, and to thy needy in thy land. And as the meeting was closing, he said, I see what you're promoting here is like you're teaching us that we can have our hands open to our poor people, so that we can give to the people around us. And essentially, yes, that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to help you be raised up out of poverty and at a place where you're coming together in community and you're able to help someone else. Now, I talked about mind shift. So when you can take somebody from that idea of what can I get from the program, even to the fact that our children are watching and learning, and they're learning that, well, whatever you need to do to be successful, you have to find a good program that will give you something and then stick to that for your whole life. And when you can take that mentality and shift it to say, I have been blessed with resources, how can I help somebody that's less fortunate than me? That's a tremendous shift, and that takes a lot of time and work. It's easy. When I talked about what's easier to do, that is the hard route, but that is essentially what we are trying to create. This picture is taken from a refugee camp near South Sudan in Kenya. So how Open Hands began, Merle Burkholder, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that name. He lives in Ontario, Canada, spent a lot of time with NYP up there. He had lived in Haiti for a little while, and he saw that all the resources that were being sent to help all the people in need was sometimes creating dependencies that instead of lifting people out of poverty, it was keeping them kind of trapped in these cycles of poverty. And he was asked to be on the Anabaptist Foundation's board as that was starting. And one of the things that he had a question on was he said, we're doing all these things to our North American brothers and sisters, Christian believers, where they already have access to banking, they already have access to financial institutions. And he said, but what are we going to do for people in Haiti, for instance, and other places of the world where they're in remote villages where they have no access to banking? What about our brothers and sisters in those places of the world? And they said, well, we don't know, but they began to put a committee together to begin to explore some options. How can we actually help our brothers and sisters around the world living in poverty? And out of that came the vision for Open Hands. The program started in 2009 in Haiti, and under that time, it was under the umbrella of Anabaptist Financial. For the first 5 years, I believe it ran underneath of Anabaptist Financial until it grew to become its own board, its own entity, its own 501c3. But the philosophy has stayed the same. It's not to give a handout, but to give people a hand up. And I'm sure you've heard that saying up there, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you can teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So my goal here this morning is I want to talk a little bit about the poverty mindset, and then I'll talk more about what we are doing as an organization of Open Hands. What is poverty? So when I think about poverty, I think about what we already talked about, a lack of food, lack of clothing, lack of shelter. That's what I think about of poverty, is a material poverty. But when we hear from people who live in poverty, when they talk about the situations that they're in, they talk about poverty a little bit differently. And this is for people who are making choices that we don't have to make. They're making choices of, am I going to take my sick child to the doctor to get medicine, or am I going to fix the leaking roof on my house? Am I going to send my children to school, or am I going to need them to help pay the bills, help put food on the table? So they're making choices that are really difficult. What does it feel like to be in that kind of situation, to lack the material things when their resources just aren't enough to cover their basic needs? What does it feel like to not have any access to capital? If they're in a desperate situation where they need to take out a loan, no banking available in their village, the only option is to maybe take a loan from a loan shark who's going to charge an exorbitant amount of interest, and they'll be trapped in this cycle of poverty for the rest of their lives. The World Bank estimates that approximately 700 million people live on less than $2.15 per day. And so the most obvious visual of that is the lack of material resources. But what I was saying, what do they say about poverty? And the answer shows that poverty is more than just a lack of resources. It's personal. There's an emotional side as well. They talk about, of course, they're talking about the lack of material things, but they talk about the lack of options. They're talking about living in fractured communities. They're talking about hopelessness for the future, like they don't have a voice, like they are the least of society. That this strain of trying to meet needs on a day-to-day basis has an emotional challenge as well. It's exhausting. They talk about shame, of not feeling valued, about no voice. And so living in these environments, it begins to dim their hope, dim the hope that anything will ever change. We're living in this, my grandfather lived in this poverty, my dad lived in this poverty, I'm going to live in this poverty. There's really no hope for change. And when they begin to lose that hope, it's easy to then believe that I'm in this desperate situation where there's no hope. Even God doesn't care about me. Even God doesn't love me. I want to be very clear. So I'm talking about community development as Open Hands. There are times of need, of desperation, when you need to give people a hand out. When there's a crisis, when there's a hurricane or a flood, some sort of devastation, there's a time for handouts. Open Hands doesn't fill in that space. And so if this is visual is helpful for you at all, we have this circle right here was what we would call like what it was normal. And then there's this devastation where you have this sudden decline in living circumstances. And then we have this yellow spot, which we're talking about humanitarian aid. There's a time to come in and help people to get reestablished. But what I'm talking about this morning is this spot right here where we're shifting into community development. And I think what has happened in the past and is easy to do, like I'm not putting blame on anybody for any of this, but this spot right here where it shifts, we tend to overstay, and we tend to, out of the goodness of our hearts, give people something longer than what we should, and it then creates a dependency instead of shifting into community development on how we can help them help themselves with where they're at. Now, if I were to go home to Lancaster County and discover that my house had burned to the ground, that would be a disaster. That'd be somewhat devastating, but it wouldn't like wreck the rest of my life. Like I would know for sure that I wouldn't have to worry about where I'm going to get breakfast tomorrow. I wouldn't have to worry about where I'm going to sleep tonight. I wouldn't have to worry about having a vehicle to get around the next day because we live in a Christian community. Same way here. I'm sure like that you would resonate with that. Now, when someone doesn't live in that kind of community, especially when they have no access to any kind of capital like we're talking about, when they experience something like that, where do you go? Like live under the bridge, maybe? It's devastating, and it can have lifelong circumstances that they're going to be dealing with because they don't live in that kind of community. And that's what we are trying to do with Open Hands, is bring people together in community. And I'll talk more about that because that is something that happens very strongly in these savings groups. So the first and foremost what we teach is that, okay, so I kind of talked about this already. It's not, poverty alleviation isn't just about fixing people's circumstances. It's about helping them discover that they are an image bearer, that they are created in the image of Christ, and therefore they have tremendous value. And that's so like if you take someone who in our Asian countries where we're operating, where there's a high influence of Buddhism and Hinduism, and they believe in reincarnation. So like if they're living in a desperate situation, it's because of something that happened in the past. Like I am here because of the karma from the life before. And so if they have that broken worldview about their situation, there's really no hope for change because they believe that they are living in the reality of what was caused before. They are here by design, and there's really no chance for them to step beyond that. And so poverty begins with 4 key relationships. Relationship with God, relationship with others, relationship with self, and relationship with creation. So first and foremost, our relationship with God needs to be reconciled, to be rising up out of poverty. And you're going to look at these relationships and say like, well, what you're saying is there are people here in the United States living in prosperity that really are living out in poverty. And yes, I mean, that can kind of be true in these relationships. Because if your relationship with God is broken, you cannot reach a place of peace, of shalom, of abundant life. You need that restored relationship with Christ, with God. And then, of course, with others, beginning to focus on others' needs. I talked about shifting from what is best for me to thinking about what is good for other people, working together in community, and relationship with ourselves. And this is bigger, like I talked about, probably more so than what we think about too. And living in poverty, I have no value, I have no dignity, no purpose. So that restored relationship with ourselves, we are created in the image of God. We have value. God gives us purpose. And so working on that, restoring that relationship. And then, of course, God gave us all work to do. If we look at, these are all taken from Genesis 1, 26 through 28. God gave man work to do in the garden, and part of that work is to cultivate the earth, but part of that work is to make his name known to the nations around them. So God gave work for us to do. And so those are the 4 key relationships that we begin to work on in rising up out of poverty, in reconciling these 4 key relationships. You can think of this like a wheel, perhaps. So like if one of those relationships is broken, if one of those is a spoke, as that wheel goes around, there's going to be an immense pressure on that center, on that hub. And of course, what we're getting to when we can work at restoring those relationships, we're restoring dignity, restoring value, restoring hope. Where a single mother who was unloved can feel wanted again, seeing her God-given worth as a safe place for her children to raise money for her school fees. So what is a savings group? This is a picture from a savings group in Colombia. As a savings group begins to put their policies together, they formulate their own policies of how they're going to function as a group. I'll talk more about that, but they're having a time of prayer over their policies as they're beginning to meet. So, savings groups actually look a lot like what we would call church. There's a time of worship. Our facilitators, as we call them, the people that we hire and train to use the curriculum, send them out into their communities where they already know the language, the people, and the culture. As they begin meeting together, they have a time of teaching the biblical principles of stewardship. So they're looking into the Bible, gaining truth from the Word of God. They're having a time of prayer, a time of singing, and then they have a time of doing their finances as well. So that part doesn't fit quite as well. But the fact is, they're meeting together, coming together as a local body, essentially, learning together, singing together, praying together. And in these savings groups, they're learning some of the principles of what we call the house of principles over there on the right. So it's founded on the truth of God's word. Of course, the trust needs to be established. Then we're talking about transparency, discipline, and leadership. This is a savings group in Kenya. It's a women's savings group, all ladies, and they were wondering like what they could do in the community to help generate funding for themselves. And they came up with there's the need for a tent business in their community. And so they went together, put all their money together to buy a tent, and now they go and rent that tent out to local activities that are happening, funerals, celebrations, that sort of thing. And they immediately discovered that people begin asking they want some chairs. Can you bring the tent to us? Can you set the tent up for us? And so their business is already starting to grow. But that came to happen because they put their resources together. But what the facilitator, what the director in Kenya says is what they are doing when they go together is set up that tent, is they are showing a picture in their community that is foreign to their communities, is they are working together for the benefit of each other, working together in unity, in community, in a community that focuses more on individualism. And so he says just them working together like that is quite a statement in their community. Finding Jesus in savings groups. So that is first and foremost what gets us excited about what is happening in the groups. So like I said, our curriculum that Open Hands has developed is so gospel-centered. The gospel is woven throughout the curriculum, that there are Muslim people like this lady here who would never come to church, would never come to a Bible study. They're interested in coming to a savings group, and they find Christ in the savings group. And they're asking for baptism. They're asking, is there a pastor that can come start a church in our community and in our village? And so that we don't work as a church planting organization. Like, we work with church planting organizations. When we go into a new area, we'll find out who are some organizations that are already there that we can partner with, and then they take care of the continued discipleship. We want to have that strong connection back and forth, but primarily we are there to help them in their desperate financial situations. So finding Christ. finding community, restoring hope and dignity. There's a story, instead of talking a lot about restoring hope and dignity, I want to tell you a story that explains it better. And this comes from our director of operations in Kenya. He's a part of the Beachy Church over there, Amata Thomas. Maybe some of you know of him. But he tells this story. There were a lot of people came together as they were starting savings groups. He says a group of maybe 200 people. And so they had broken down into little groups as they were beginning to form their policies. There was a group in the back corner. This was the second day of their meeting. They had already kind of spelled out what it looks like to be part of the group. There's a group in the back corner. They raised their hand. They said, "We have a question for you, Mr. Mata. We have agreed that one share in our group is worth $1. And we are talking about small amounts of savings. Now, $1 in Kenya is worth significantly different than $1 here in the States. But they had agreed that one share is worth $1 in their group. And he said, "We have this lady here," and they pointed to her. She's obviously living in poverty in a desperate situation. She can't give $1. She can only give 50 cents. So we would like that our shares are all worth $1. Her share's worth 50 cents. And he said, "Well, I don't understand. Like, how's that supposed to work if everyone's shares are worth $1, hers is 50 cents?" But he said, "There's a solution. Come with me. I'll take you to this other group. There's a 50-cent group here." And she didn't move. And so he said, "No, if you stay here, it needs to be $1. But he reached for her hand. And he said, "I'd gently take you over to this 50-cent group." And she stood up, and she got this big smile on her face, and her eyes lit up. And she said, "No, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to bring $1. And so he said, "Well, God is doing something in her life, so he began to observe, like, what is going to happen now." And so the first meeting that they had, she brought $1. The highest contributor brought $3. The second meeting, she brought $2. The highest contributor brought $3. The third meeting, she brought $3. The other highest was $3 as well. The fourth meeting, she brought $4, and everyone else had brought $3 as the highest contributor. But he said what stood out to him the most is not what was happening financially for her, but what was happening to her as a person. He said she was the most unwell-kept, the most unwell-dressed person in that whole group of people. He said she became the most well-dressed person. She became the most well-kept person in that whole group of 200 people. And so he said what people around her wanted to do is pity her and say, look at her desperate situation. She needs help. She can't, there's nothing that she can do about that. And he said, by the grace of God, he said, God was calling out to her, and she responded to that call, that in the image of God, you are created with dignity, you're created with value, you're created with purpose, and she responded to that call. And that's the kind of change, that's the kind of hope that happens through the teaching of the savings groups. But of course, there's a sense of community. Like I said, the savings group started in Haiti. There's a group in Haiti that tells us that we don't allow anyone in our savings group to take money from anybody else other than us. Like, we care for each other. We don't allow anyone to take foreign aid. We take care of each other, even to the point, and this is pretty common, like if there's a funeral, a spouse passed away or something in the group will come together. They'll cover the expenses of the funeral. They want to show up at the funeral together as a group because we are one as a community together. And then, of course, the financial benefits and growth. Devota, I think her name is, from Kenya. She took out a pretty substantial loan, actually, to build this building right here, to open up her sewing business that she has. But the amount of money that she is now saving is still a really good investment for her to do that. But that's, again, like, she took that loan out of her savings group, which gave her access to capital, which she wouldn't have had otherwise. And then, of course, strengthening churches for self-sufficiency. There's a church in Latin America that said, we started doing savings groups. We were having a lot of church problems. We were working through a lot of stuff, and the curriculum is actually helping us a lot as a brotherhood in our own congregation work through some sorts of things too. So it works well there. So there's 3 different ways that savings groups operate. There's the fixed amount is saved, and it rotates between the group. So the first meeting that everyone brings, they would decide how much money they're bringing at each meeting. The first meeting, we're going to give all the money to John. He's going to be able to take that money and do something with it. The next meeting, I'll get all the money, and then the next meeting, you get all the money, and so it just goes around the group like that till everyone has received their money. And they'll set that pattern out on their needs, who has the most need. So it gives them an earlier start to some of the finances. Or it's just a straight saving that the money goes into the box, and at the end of the saving cycle, which is usually 9 months to a year, they get the money back again. That's often a larger sum than they've ever had at one time before. And so they're able to do, hopefully start the multiplication, maybe start small, buy a few chickens so they can start selling eggs or something along that line. The third way is the only way that they get interest on that money, and that's where they put their money together, and then they would loan it out, usually to someone in their group who is starting a business or has a need. And they spell out what that all needs to look like. But they will collect interest that way, which is a fair interest in comparison to what their other options are. And of course, coming back to the hope, when someone is able to accomplish something that they used with just the resources that they already had. So we don't inject any funds into their savings groups. This is all money using the resources that they have already had. And when they see what they're able to accomplish with that, it restores a lot of that dignity and value and hope, that purpose, when they see that it's something that they did by their own. So what we do is we train facilitators, we call them. So we'll go into a place, this is in Kenya, and get a group of people together who are interested in participating in the program. We'll train them how to use the curriculum that Open Hands has developed. They get compensated for their time, their travel, their expenses. It usually starts out as a very low part-time job. As they are faithful in their work, as they have opportunity, they may grow into a full-time position with Open Hands teaching savings groups. Each facilitator can handle, like to keep it around not more than 20 different savings groups that they're coaching, that they're evaluating, that they're monitoring, that they're continuing to teach in. Each group is responsible for their procedures, for their documents, so we will coach them through that, but they determine what are we going to do with someone who says they're going to participate and they don't. What are we going to do with how the savings get dispersed? Who's going to make the decisions? They'll do that collectively, and they'll form a president, a treasurer, a secretary, all within their own group. And so it gives a very strong sense of grassroots level, local leadership. In fact, well, I'll get to that story in just a second. This I wanted to highlight this right here. That is traditionally how the savings are kept. Now, with the rise of modern technology, they do use phones some, but in more remote places, they still use lockbox with 3 different locks on it. So there'll be 3 different padlocks with 3 different keys. The key goes with 3 different people, and the box goes with a 4th different person. So the only time you can open that box is when the group is together, and then they guard that box with their life, I guess. Like they make sure that thing is secure, that it's holding their treasured resources together. And it works surprisingly really, really well. There's been very, very few instances where we have any trouble with that savings group box. And then, of course, when they get that money back again, it's a celebration. They get together, they celebrate. Oftentimes, they'll get matching shirts for their group, which I always was like, man, it seems kind of senseless to spend money on matching shirts. But if you think about someone who has no clothing to wear, who feels like an outcast in society, and they get to be part of a community, they get to actually wear the same clothing that this group of people is wearing, it creates a lot of strength for community. It gives them a place to belong. Merle Burkholder, that's a picture of him talking to an individual there. And the story that I wanted to highlight with this is he talked with a lady for about 30 minutes about savings groups. He had went over to observe, to monitor. And They talked about 30 minutes. She was excited about what savings groups are doing. At the end of that conversation, she had no idea that he had anything to do with their savings groups, because it was someone that her savings group is a group of people from her community. The president, the treasurer, the secretary, all people that they know from their community. The facilitator, someone that they know from their community. Here's this white guy that shows up asking about savings groups. She didn't connect him to the group at all because it's so locally owned. And I think that's a really beautiful thing about the design of savings group, because when it's their own, that, again, coming back to the restored dignity, the restored hope, this is something that they were able to do together as a group. Children's savings groups, actually pretty popular. We go into a lot of schools. If we can teach them at a young age these biblical principles of stewardship, imagine the impact that that will have years down the road as they teach their children, as they talk to people that they know. And because it's so locally owned, I wanted to add, it spreads really quickly from one village to the next. We're not waiting for John to move to Kenya so we can start a program. We're hiring Kenyan people to run the program so it can go from one village to the next. And we're actually experiencing a lot of rapid growth as an organization. I'm going to skip through that.
For decades, we from developing countries have tried to solve poverty, and a lot of times we've done this.
More about what Open Hands does, kind of along the same lines of what we're already talking about. Return on investment, it's hard to determine what a return on an investment really is. We can talk about gospel impact, dignity, value, economic transformation, community hope. Those things are hard to measure. But what I wanted to highlight in this is this picture right here is a savings group in Colombia. They had just learned in their curriculum about using what God has given you to help people that are in need. And so at the close of that meeting, they said, what can we do as a group to help other people? And so they went out, put some food baskets together, and went out into their community and gave to people in need. Now, each savings group has a benevolence fund where they take just a small, usually we're talking about maybe 10 cents, that they put in their benevolence fund. So they have a fund that they can give to people in need, that they can help other people. I think that's a really beautiful story, when you can take somebody who had their hands out to receive and went with their hands out to give to somebody else. That's transformation. A couple of stories. I am about out of time. So picture on the right is Charles from Kenya. His story is, he lives on the, I want to say northwest side of the mountain. Now I'm not sure if that's correct. But the problem with where he lives is the rainstorms come, hit the mountain, they go up, they dissipate. He doesn't get any rain. And he's trying to farm on the backside of the mountain. And so he became part of a savings group. For 2 years he saved. He bought 3/4 mile of pipe, and he brought that water tank. And so he could pipe from the nearest water source, which is a well. So I'm assuming that's metered water. But he is now able to grow produce in an area that's really dry. So he has a product that is able to meet the needs of people in the community. So he has a business that's doing well. The lady on the right, also a story from Kenya. Again, referring back to Mata Thomas when he talked about this story. Here on the bottom, there's some sheep. And he says, did you know that chickens, we'll start with chickens, did you know that chickens can give birth to cows? And he said the story of this lady is that she took she's a widow in their community, and he says she has never come to the church asking for anything because she has always been able to supply for her needs. She took a small loan from her savings group. She went and bought a couple of chickens. She built that chicken herd up until she took them to market and bought a couple of sheep. Well, the sheep was pregnant, soon she had more sheep, and so she was able to soon sell some sheep, and now she has some cows. And so whenever she has a need, she just goes out into her livestock herd, and she takes one, sells it, and provides for her need. And that started really small. That started in a really small access to capital in her savings group. Now, if you take that and take a look at these children, or at the close of their savings group, they're all holding a bird. It's not all about finances. They made it a little fun. They're all holding a bottle of Coke there as well. But if chickens give birth to cows, what is the potential in a story like this, right? What is the potential that these children have learned that are putting their money to action, putting it to work? What can that lead to? This is a lady in Thailand, northern Thailand, the Karen group people group, their savings group went together and they make those little handbags, crossbody bags that you wear. That's their way of providing for each other in their community. I threw this in there. This comes from Latin America. I think it was from El Salvador, where they used this picture as in their training. So you have $1,300, we'll buy you a smartphone. You have $1,300, we'll buy you a cow. 2 years later, what do you have after your investment? And I think that's pretty powerful. When you talk about what do you do with your money has impact down the road. And then, of course, I want to play this. It's a time of worship. This group right here, those children, the story behind that is they knew that Christmas is coming up, and they knew that they're not going to get any Christmas gifts, and they're not going to have anything to give to their siblings at Christmas. And so they began saving money so that they have something to give to the people around them, oftentimes going at the expense of their morning breakfast or a meal, so that they would have some money to give to help other people. So we are operating in 15 different countries around the world. It started in Haiti. Haiti is still our largest program. In fact, even with the unrest in the political tensions in Haiti, our programs have continued to grow. We just started in September of 24, a new program in northern Haiti. And again, this comes back to the fact that it's Haitian people that are running it, that it continues to be successful. In fact, for the last 4 years now, Haiti has saved over $1 million each year in their savings groups. So I didn't even know they have those kind of resources in Haiti, but it's small amounts, of course, but the power of that for stability. We also are operating in Mexico, as John already talked about. Mario Coda is taking on a larger role with Open Hands. He's becoming program director of our India program. So much opportunity in India. Guatemala, El Salvador, slow but growing program. Colombia and Venezuela is both pretty new. And when I talk about it expands quickly from one community to the next, it's what happened in Colombia. We started in Colombia, and next thing we know, we had a facilitator moving into his home country of Venezuela. And so we started operating savings groups in Venezuela as well. So that program is growing pretty quickly. Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Uganda. Ghana is new for us too as of September of 24. India, Nepal, and Thailand are the 15 countries that we're operating in. We have, these numbers are hard to get accurate because they're changing so rapidly with all the different places that we're operating, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 44,600 people in part of savings groups right now. You can connect with us on social media. We have the stand in the back, there's some information, a newsletter that we send out quarterly that you can sign up to. We'll gladly send that to you for free. We also started doing savings group simulation. If you have a youth group or if you want to get together and learn what it's like to be part of a savings group, we do some role playing that we can have you experience a savings group. Faith and Finances is a curriculum that we're using here in the States. If you feel like you know somebody that would like to use this kind of curriculum in your own community, there's a few places here in the States that we're doing that as well. We can talk more about that. To fund our growth, we're looking at 56% growth in our next fiscal year, which started in July. And so we have a matching grant opportunity that just actually opened up now. We have $250,000 pledged, and so we're trying to match that now. There's opportunity that way. But most of all, thank you for the opportunity for being here. Very grateful for your time, for your attention, to let me talk about Open Hands. This is a fellow from Guatemala.
Pertenezco al grupo de ahorro de aquí del Buen Samaritano y he logrado varios proyectos a través de los 5 o 6 años que tengo de pertenecer. Y estoy agradecido con la ONG que ha venido aquí para ayudarnos. Gracias.
Get to hear the rooster crowing in the background, get the cultural experience with that. But thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions that they would like some clarification on? Thanks for the extra few minutes here that I took.
So the money that you all need and is put into the program is for the facilitators?
Correct, great question. Yes, yeah, so since we don't put any money into the savings group, the question is why do we need money, right? And so we, like I said, we hire our facilitators, they go into their communities and teach, and they get compensated for that, which is oftentimes a lot more efficient than having someone from the States doing it. In Kenya, for instance, a fair wage is a few dollars a day, which doesn't seem fair. But yeah, we have somewhere around 260 hired facilitators for the work that we do around the world. And then, of course, we have travel from the States, like we'll do refresher trainings, we'll continue. We have about 7 years worth of curriculum if they were to go through it back to back to back. And so we'll continue to teach our facilitators. We're always bringing in new facilitators, teaching them, and so that requires some travel from the States to there, some travel for monitoring and evaluations as well. Yeah, well, thank you. God bless your ministry here, your church service here, your congregation. It's been great to be with you, and just be faithful on the journey that God called you to, right?